Hi, Lone Stars. Welcome to Science. Here at Lone Star Online Academy, today we are going to be talking about the wonderful world of constellations. My name is Miss Nix, and I will be your guide today. Let's start off with a brief summary of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about constellations. Now, people have watched the sky for millions of years, some out of curiosity, some out of boredom, some looking for answers. But one thing that they all had in common was they all saw patterns in the way that the stars revolved in the sky. Before we had smartphones, we had books. And before we had books, we had images on cave walls or sacred temples. Now, the messages that they were spoken with their words are now lost. But the sky has been a canvas for telling stories about the meaning of life for as long as we can see in history. So let's get started. I'm going to show our slide presentation. I'm excited about today's lesson. I hope you are too. All right, here we go, guys. The wonderful world of constellations. Today we are learning about constellations so that you will understand what constellations are and why they exist. You'll know you're successful when you can explain what a constellation is, where they're located, how you can see one, examples of constellations, and why constellations exist. Here's some vocabulary words to look for today in the lesson. You're going to see the word constellation. You're going to see asterism. You're going to see hemisphere and myth and legend. The word myth and legend should stand out to you because you've worked on those in your OLS. So what exactly is a constellation? A constellation is a special group of stars. They make a specific shape, and each one has their own name. Constellations are a lot like a dot-to-dot puzzle. They're connected with invisible lines. So you have to use your imagination to see those pictures. And that's what people back in history did. They looked at the sky and they saw pictures and formed those dot-to-dot lines with their imagination. Sometimes when we talk about a constellation and you look at the sky, they're hard to see. But I'll teach you some tricks today so that you will be able to see the constellations. Even though the stars in a constellation will look close to each other when you look in the sky, they're actually very far away. Our sky is filled with mystery, and it is filled with a lot of intrigue. So let's go into deeper. What are constellations? Constellations can be observed in the sky at night, but they are there in the day, but the sun is so bright that we can't see them. Constellations change over our seasons and during the night. That is because the earth is constantly moving. Right now, we're moving. We just can't feel it. And there's that in that cool picture that gives you an idea of how the earth orbits around the sun. Wherever you are on the earth also changes the locations, the constellations that you see. For example, people that live in the northern hemisphere can see different constellations than the people that live in the southern hemisphere. There's one of our vocabulary words, hemisphere. So let's go into that a little more. All right, on this picture, you can see the northern hemisphere is at the top and the southern hemisphere is at the bottom. And they are separated by that line right there, which is also imaginary, and you can't really see it, called the equator. So the equator separates the southern and the northern hemisphere. Here's you a cool tip. The majority of the world, of the population, lives in the northern hemisphere. Only 1/10 of the population lives in the southern hemisphere. Let's look at that in a new view. Here you go. You can see up top the northern hemisphere and the bottom the southern hemisphere. We live right here in North America, and you can see Texas is about right there, somewhere under that somewhere under the E and R. And you can tell when you see Europe and Asia and Africa that most of our population resides in the northern hemisphere. The Earth is also blocked off in the eastern and the western hemisphere. The majority of the population of the world resides in the northern, eastern hemisphere. You would think there's a lot of people in North America, but there's more over there in Asia. I think that is where the majority of the population resides. So that's what hemisphere is. It's just the way that the Earth is sectioned off. So constellations have had many uses over the years. In ancient or old times, constellations were used as a calendar. That's how they knew when they could plant their corn or when they could plant all those crops. Or they even looked at the stars to know when that they could gather their crops and when the vegetables were ready to pick. Constellations were also used for navigation. The sailors used them that told them where to go and how to get home. This tool right here is called a sextant. And sailors used it a long time ago, probably about in the 1400s is when they used sextants. And they used it and they held it up to the sky and they could measure the distance with the stars. And then they knew how long it would take them to get back home or get to a destination. I guess you could say that was their GPS. Whereas today we use our smartphones, they used this. This would be their smartphone. Even today, the astronauts are trained to use the constellations just in case their GPS on their rocket ship fails or doesn't work. Then they know that how to look for the stars and get back home. So, how many constellations are there? Make a guess before I do the screen. Can you make a guess? Many cultures from all over the world have their own constellations, but there are actually 88 official constellations. 88 constellations. That means there's 88 pictures in the sky. Do you know any? Do you know any constellations? Can you think of any names that you've heard before? I bet you can. With 88, I'm sure you can think of one. All right, so before we get into the constellations are made by stars, right? So let's look at stars. The one star that you're very familiar with is the sun, right? That is our star. But let's look at the size comparison of our sun compared to other stars. The sun is actually very small compared to other stars. And the sun is actually a baby compared to other stars in its age. Look right there on your screen. You can see that little bitty, you can't even hardly see it. It's so itty bitty. The sun is a speck compared to some of the other stars. This star right here, the UY Scuti, that is the biggest star in our galaxy. Now that doesn't mean it's the biggest star in the universe, just our galaxy, and we live in the galaxy of Milky Way. So check out some of the other stars. We have Cepheid. We have Pistol, Betelgeuse, Antares, Arcturus. Arcturus is an awesome star. It's always so bright in the sky. And Pollux right there, and Sirius. Pollux and Sirius are named after two twins from Greek mythology, so they're really interesting. Let's keep going. There's another comparison of the stars, so you can just see it in another view. That little bitty black speck, there's the sun. And you know the sun is pretty big. If you could take the sun and open the top, which we can't do, but if we could take the top off the sun, we could put 1,000,000 Earths inside the sun. That is how big the sun is. And really, when you look at these other stars, the sun is kind of small, right? And there's Sirius and Pollux. Remember I told you they were named after twins. They're in the Gemini constellation. There's Arcturus, very bright star, really cool. All right, so what can we see when we look into the sky? Well, there's 88 constellations. Some of these constellations we can't see because remember, you can see different constellations depending on which hemisphere you live in. So if you live eastern or you live western, you're going to be able to see different stars. The smallest constellation is called Crux, and the largest constellation is called Hydra. Now let's talk about some popular constellations. One of the most popular constellations that most people know about is Orion the Hunter. Another popular one that we're going to talk about later in the lesson, I've got a great story for you, so I hope you hang on and go to the end of this video because this story is really cool, is Ursa Major. Ursa Major means big bear in Latin, and Ursa Major points to the North Star. The North Star is very special. The Big Dipper is not, if any of you've heard the term Big Dipper, that is not a constellation. But the stars that form the Big Dipper are part of Ursa Major. That is the constellation. Ursa Major is the name of the constellation. The Big Dipper is called an asterism. There's one of those vocabulary words. An asterism is just a group of stars recognized as a pattern, but it's not an official constellation. So the Big Dipper is an asterism, and it means it makes a picture or a pattern, but it's not one of those 88 official constellations. And another popular one is Ursa Minor. That is part of the Little Dipper, and that constellation has Polaris. And remember, Polaris is very special, and we'll learn why in just a few minutes. All right, so there's 88 constellations. I broke them down so you could kind of see what makes up those 88 constellations. There's 13 zodiac signs, and over here there's a picture of the zodiac signs, and I bet some of you've heard of those, like Aries and Pisces and Capricorn. A lot of people like to tell their fortunes with some of these zodiac signs. There's 42 animals, part of the 88 constellations. That's a lot of animals in the sky. There's 28 objects, like maybe a bow or a belt. There's 14 humans, and I think there's I forget what their name is, but you know when you mix a human and an animal, like a man that has horse legs, there's 4 of those. But I didn't put those because there's not many of those. All right, and here is just an artist depiction of what the sky looks like with all the beautiful constellations. So when you look at the sky, it's filled with pictures, more than stars. You got to have imagination to find constellations. You have to have that. That is the most important thing. You have to have darkness and imagination. All right, guys, let's learn about Polaris. Now, this is a real image, but it's time elapsed. It is showing you what happens over a course of a whole night. So when they put all those pictures on top of each other, this is what the stars look like, and this is how they move. Notice how right in the middle, it doesn't look like it's moving. That is where Polaris is, and Polaris is the North Star. All the stars in the sky set and rise just like the sun. When you wake up in the morning, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. And that is exactly how the other stars do. They rise and they set. And this is how they do it. Just like that little circle image. And they all go around the North Star Polaris. Polaris does not move. It sits still. It's like a fixed position. So if you find Polaris, you can find all the rest of the constellations. To find Polaris, you can find north. You can use a compass. You can get a compass, find north. When you look due north, if you hold your arm straight out on the horizon, like where the sun comes up, flat on the horizon, but looking north, you hold it up, you go up about 8 degrees, you put your fist on top of your other fist, and then put your fist on top one more time, and you should be pointing straight at Polaris. Due north about this high. That's where Polaris is, every single night. If you find where Polaris is, every night when you walk out and look for it, it will be there. The only problem with that is Polaris is kind of dim. It's not as bright as some of the other stars. But the other stars in the sky rise and set. So Polaris would be easier to find because it's always in the same spot. And there you go. Once you find Polaris, you can use a star map to find all the other stars in the Milky Way. And I put a link right here showing how I could go to Google and I could search for the word star map, and all these cool star maps would pop up that show me where what constellation is. And also, there is another thing you can do. You can download, if you have a tablet or if your parents maybe let you use their phone sometimes, you can download an app called Google Sky Map. And if you go to the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, you can just search for Sky Map. And it is an amazing app. All you do is you open your app, and when you open your app, it gives you an image of the sky, and it will tell you exactly what you're pointing at. So right now, even though it's daylight, I am aiming my phone straight at Pluto. And if I go over here, there, my phone is telling me there's where the sun is. If I look down, which under, that would be the southern hemisphere, is showing me the moons down there. So this is an amazing app. It's called Sky Map, and you'll learn a lot if you download that app and play with it. It's very, very cool. All right, the myth. There's another one of our vocabulary words, myth. A myth is like a legend or a story that people have told over time. The myth of Ursa Major. As with many myths and legends, though, there are many versions of this story. And one version of this story is the one that I'm going to tell you today, and it is about Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So let's get to it. I've got some pictures to help me tell the story. So hopefully I can remember it. Let's see. All right. The first thing that we need to look at to tell the story is the first guy right here in this. And I'll click on them and highlight them as I go through this, story. All right. Do you see my little mouse moving right there over the man? All right. That man, his name is Zeus. Zeus was the king of all the gods. And his wife was named Hera, and that right there is Hera. You see my mouse wiggling on the images as I go through them. His wife was Hera, the queen of the gods. She was a goddess, but there was many people who were scared of Hera, and she was not very well liked. She was not liked because of all her evil ways. And remember, guys, this is a myth. This is a legend. This is not a true story. So Zeus was married to Hera, but one day he saw a beautiful princess. Her name was Callisto, and there is our Princess Callisto. He was captivated by her beauty and her super sweetness. They fell in love. And soon after, a child came. The child's name was Arcus. Hera, Zeus's wife, was very, very angry about this. And to get revenge, she put a curse on Callisto and turned Callisto into a bear. Oh, Callisto was so sad. Her beautiful hands started to grow fur and claws. The princess tried to scream. Right there, you see, we have to go back. Right there, you see the little bear begging. She tried to scream, but when she screamed, the only thing that came out of her mouth was a growl. She begged Zeus, please turn me back to my original form. But Zeus ignored her because Zeus did not want to make his wife Hera any more angry. So Callisto roamed the forest as a bear. She was very lonely and she missed her son. Sometimes she would go to the edge of the forest just to watch her son grow up and play. She missed him so much. She missed all her friends. She missed her family, and she missed her life. Years and years went by, and as the great bear roamed the forest, one day she encountered a hunter. But the hunter was her son, Arcus. She was so excited to see him, she forgot she was a bear, and she jumped up on her hind legs to give Arcus a hug. But he didn't know that was his mom. So he thought the bear was trying to attack him. So he pulled back his bow to shoot the mean bear. But Zeus stepped in. Zeus said, "No, this will not work. This would be a tragedy." So to save Arcus and to save the beautiful princess, he took them both and threw them into the sky. So when he threw them into the sky, he transformed them both into constellations so that they could be together forever. And that is the myth, that Callisto is now Ursa Major, and Arcus, her son, is now Ursa Minor. There's the constellation. So let's look at that on another side. There is the constellation Ursa Major, and there's the constellation Ursa Minor. So mom and son are in the sky together forever. So if you look up in the sky and you find the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper, now you can think that that's the mom and that's the son, and they are together forever. So it's kind of a sweet ending, right? Yes. And good to point out right here, in the Little Dipper, that is where Polaris is. Polaris is right, let's see. There's the Little Dipper. It would be about right there. Yep, about right there. That's Polaris. The sky's filled with stories, isn't it, guys? It is so filled with stories. So let's reflect on what we've learned today about constellations. Well, constellations help people find their way at night. If you got lost, you could look, and if you knew which way was north, you could look for Polaris, and you could go straight north and find your way home. The stars also help farmers know when to harvest. They help sailors travel across the ocean, and they've helped sailors for many, many years do that. They helped our ancestors make calendars. The pictures in the sky also help us remember where other stars are located. If I found Polaris with Little Dipper, I would know where I could find Ursa Major and the other stars in that constellation. And they're also fun to read the myths and legends. They're very entertaining. There we go, guys. There's some pictures of some constellations. Right here at the bottom here, you can see Pegasus. Pegasus is in the shape of a horse, and it's got a cool story too. You might want to look that one up. It's really awesome. One of my favorite stories is not on this screen here, but it's of the Gemini twins, and that's Castor and Pollux. And they have a really cool story. And God also threw them in the sky so that they could two be together forever. So if you have time one day, look up the story of the constellation Gemini and Castor and Pollux and see what you think. I think it's really interesting. All right, so constellations are more than just pictures in the sky, right? There are 88 constellations, don't forget that. But there are still constellations to be found, right? Yes. Make sure you look up at the stars tonight. And you know what? You might see another image. Use your imagination. As long as you've got darkness and imagination, you've got the tools you need to find constellations or to make your own constellations. You might even make a cool myth or legend story to go with your found constellation. All righty, guys. There is the famous Star Tex, Lone Star Online Academy's mascot. And you are also stars, Lone Stars. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope I inspired you a little bit about constellations, and I hope when you look up at the sky tonight or anytime you're out there, you see more than just specks of light in our sky. You see stories and history and mystery. All right, guys, I'm Miss Nix. Thank you so much for coming. Bye.